Working mothers are feeling the burn as this pandemic threatens to wipe out decades of progress within 5 short months. Many women have already had to decide between holding on to a job or caring for their family, and the repercussions of those choices will be felt for years to come. Jennifer Reynolds is the president and CEO of Toronto Finance International, a public private partnership whose mission is to promote and develop Toronto's financial services sector and to establish its prominence as a leading global financial center. Her 20-year career in the financial services industry has included senior roles in investment banking, venture capital, and global risk management. Welcome to the show, Jennifer.
Thank you. Happy to be speaking with you.
So I recently read an article where it was on the CBC, where you mentioned that women have been have been laid off are actually not looking anymore, and that you found this trend deeply concerning. So why don't we start there? Why is this such a concern?
Yeah, I mean, what we saw happen in March and April was men and women lost their jobs in similar numbers, actually, about 1.5 million women, 1.5 million men. And what we've seen since then, though, is men are gradually going back to work in greater numbers. And so there's two things going on there. Why are men going back more than women? Number one, they're in different sectors. Women tended to be in service sectors, accommodation, food, health services, areas which were very, very hard hit and haven't come back yet. And quite frankly, we don't know when those will come back at this point. But the other dynamic, and to your point, is those who have lost their jobs and aren't back working, 50% aren't even looking at this stage from the numbers that we got in a recent report. And that's very disturbing, that they really aren't even looking to go back. And the obvious question is why? Why don't they want to go back? And in many cases, it's childcare. It's, the kids aren't in school, the kids are in childcare. We don't know what's happening in the fall. They're going back, but they're going back part-time, which is not a solution if you're trying to figure out childcare, having your kids in part-time, and can they go even if they're in high school? Do you want them on public transportation? So all of these things are really factoring in, I think, to that statistic that they aren't looking because there's just so much uncertainty and they just don't know what to do.
Yeah, and it feels like because, we're so, my generation, your generation, we've grown up with this very, women's rights, and we have all this, but now it feels like we have this impossible decision. It's like, when you go to university or college and they say you can have good grades and sleep, or good grades and a social life, but you can't have both. This is the same right now. You can have children and a job, but you can't have both.
Yeah, it is. It does feel like that. I mean, I feel like we're having to make decisions that we didn't have to make before, quite frankly, not in this way. I'm generalizing, but it generally is the woman who is putting up her hand and saying, I won't go back to work. I'll be the one to stay home. I'll be the one to give up my career for a period of time. And that's a very unfortunate choice, not just when it goes to gender equality. Clearly that's going to set us back as women. The longer you're out of the workforce, the harder it is to get back. You're never going to regain those wages you lost. The wage gap was huge before COVID. It's not going to get any smaller with this happening. But it really, you're sort of seeing this reversion to traditional roles in some ways. And that's a bit disturbing as well. There's gender equality piece to it, but it's also about women were earning 42% of household income prior to this pandemic. That's very, we are breadwinners. We are a significant component of household income, and we don't want to see that lost in the future.
Okay, so let's go forward then. So how do we move forward from here? Who takes the charge on this? Is it businesses? Is it government? How do we make up these losses and move forward from this point?
Well, it's a good point. One thing I would really like to impress upon people is we need to address it right now. This isn't we'll think about this one 6 months from now. We've got other more pressing problems. The recovery has to include this dynamic that's going on right now where women are being disproportionately hit. So there's a few things that need to happen. Job number one, we need our schools to be open. We need childcare to be open safely. So the government needs to focus on that. How are we going to make that happen? And if that takes an investment, then so be it, because that really is critical. And it's critical to our children. I believe our children needs to be in school learning. And I don't want them set back either. But women need to know that that's going to happen, that the kids are going to be back in school. They can then plan for childcare appropriately and then resume, getting back to work. The other thing from a government perspective that needs to be done is if there's stimulus spending that's going to happen in the economy, if they're going to be trying to help certain sectors get back on their feet, let's make sure that sectors which employ women are also getting some of that stimulus, not just heavily male dominated sectors. So we have to have that gender lens. I think we should have women at the table as we're trying to determine what the right steps are for the economy to recover. So where do women work is one question. They work in certain sectors. They tend to work often in small, medium-sized businesses. Let's make sure that we're not forgetting about those smaller businesses. They work in the not-for-profit sector and charity sectors, which have been very hard hit, and are about 70% of the employees there. So we really need to think about if there's stimulus spending, and there will be, making sure that there's some equity there too.
And do you think that businesses have a role to play in this as well? In changing the, I'm hearing horror stories about women who have been let go from their jobs because their children are in the background as they're trying to conduct work. That seems crazy to me that that businesses aren't more accommodating for that. So what's the role business can have in this, and why is it so important for businesses to be taking a leading role in this?
It really is. The private sector can do a lot, and you're right, it's not just women who have to leave the home who aren't going back to work, like leave the home to do their work. It's women who actually work in the home as well are really struggling. It's very hard to be on a Zoom call and then making meals or having a crying baby in the background. So it's been a struggle there too. So I think the private sector needs to think about how they can make any accommodations. One of those things that the financial services sector is thinking about is hours. Does it have to be 9 to 5? Can you give people flexibility to wake up early and do some work then, or later in the evening when there's less activity in the home, or when they might have some support around? Scheduling meetings, flexibility around those types of things, I think, are critical. Those are a bit of band-aids. I'm not gonna lie. Those are temporary things, but hopefully they keep us in the workforce and get us over the hump. And I think just generally really encouraging women, if you do get someone who says, I need to take a break until this is over, let's not lose them from the workforce. Let's make sure that HR stays in touch, that women stay in touch, and that hopefully there's a path back to their careers in the private sector.
Yeah, maybe it's like looking at something, like we would take a maternity leave in the past. Maybe there needs to be a leave for this COVID that you can slip back into the role you had at the same rate of pay and continue, pick up where you left off. Because, it's nice to say education needs to be fixed, but unfortunately, I don't see that happening anytime soon with the current government, particularly in Ontario. I don't see that being fixed anytime. There's just not enough money being put into it. So those problems are going to persist, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think if we don't think really innovatively about how we keep women in the workforce over the long term, we really do stand to lose our gains. It took a long time to have women working at the current rate that they were before the pandemic, and it really had elevated women from a gender, in terms of our economic equality in Canada. We still had a ways to go, don't get me wrong, but we were improving, and so losing even a little bit hurts so much. And so we really, as I said earlier, the longer we're out, the harder it's going to be. And we need and companies worked really hard. The financial services sector has worked very hard to try to increase their numbers of women. And I don't think that they want to fall backwards either, because that's a lot of work and investment that they've put into this problem. And no one wants to see that go out the window.
So you're looking at this daily. So I'm just going to ask, do you see any glimmers of hope on the horizon? Anything that makes you say that maybe this is going to turn or shift a little bit in one way?
Well, I do think that it's good that this topic is really prominent. I think it's prominent. I think government is aware of this. I think the private sector is aware of this. We've certainly seen lots of reports on this. So that's one step, awareness. Then, the next step is, what are we going to do about it? And just making sure that as I said earlier, it's part of the recovery. And I am getting the sense that that lens towards how women were hit differently from men with this particular pandemic, that has to be part of the solution. If you think about other economic crises, the last one, 2008, men were actually disproportionately hit. Things like manufacturing got hit much harder and took longer to come back relative to some sectors that women were in. And so there was investment in those areas. So we need to see the same thing happen with this one, right? Let's think about who's been hit the hardest and make sure they're included in the solution. So I think now it's about execution. We know what the problem is. How are we going to make sure we address it successfully?
Yeah, and absolutely, we need to remain vocal and keep our voices out there about this. Thank you so much for joining me today, Jennifer. This was great.
Delighted to chat with you. Thank you.